Revolutionary. The most amazing invention since the microwave. More useful than the automobile. These are just a few ways that the solo blind has been described by me. So clearly I'm being a little bit sarcastic here. But I realized I've never done an episode to talk about the solo blind, to talk about where it came from, what it does, why it exists. Let's talk about it. Okay, let me take you on a journey. This is the journey of the solo blind. I am drinking soda as I am doing this podcast because I now podcast during the day quite often, and I'm not going to drink whiskey while I'm podcasting. Right now, I guess it is almost 4 p.m., but I got stuff to do tonight. Let me take you back to 2021. We're going to go on a little journey of how the solo blind came to be. Of course, I'm going to talk about what it does, how to use it, the business so far and business plans moving forward. A couple of very vague sneak peeks at the end, just some ideas of where we're headed, some fun stuff like that. So we got to start from the beginning, though. Take it back to 2021. So I had just launched the Whiskey Noobs podcast in April of 2021. And with that, I decided to go on Instagram and on TikTok and try to advertise the podcast. The thought was I'm going to get people to come over to the podcast and make my money from the podcast. Well, Destiny had different plans because TikTok, Instagram, as we all know, in 2021 during COVID, just blew up. They became the big thing that everybody was on. And so therefore, as the platforms themselves blew up, my page started to get a lot of views and I started to get a lot of followers. And so then I'm like, well, maybe I can make this Instagram, TikTok, short form content thing. Maybe that can be like a business. Like maybe that can be my main thing. And so I started to do a lot with that. And as we all know, that's fluctuated, that's changed. Of course, now I'm doing more long form on YouTube. Go check that out, by the way. But nevertheless, at the time, that was kind of the thing. And I was still a noob, and that was why I called it Whiskey Noobs, because I knew that I knew enough to teach people, but I didn't know enough to not be a noob. I was like still green enough that I could be like, I know what newbies want to know because I'm still, in some sense, a newbie. And that was a big part of my channel. And because of that, I was still learning ways to learn more about whiskey and to get better and to develop my palate. And with that, I learned if you try whiskeys side by side, you can get a better understanding of the two whiskeys that you're trying side by side. So I started doing these side by side tastings, especially to develop my palate. Irish whiskey versus bourbon, two similar scotches to see what's different about them, things like that. And naturally, I started to move towards blind tastings. You know, I think blind tastings are one of those things that are generally known by people. We know that wine connoisseurs do blind tastings, or sommeliers, or whatever you want to call them. We know that blind tastings are just a thing. They are what level the playing field. And so then I started to get into blind tastings in this short form content, and that is really where my page was able to blow up and get to where it essentially is nowadays, is through all these blind tastings. They kind of became my thing. I'm not saying that I am the blind tasting guy, but I'm saying me as a guy, my thing is blind tastings. Like people, when they see my page, they know that I do a lot of blind tasting stuff. So all of that culminates in I'm now doing tons of blind tastings. You might know my series I did called Better Than Blanton's, and that was where I was tasting all these different things versus Blanton's. And I started doing blind taste battles where I'm like, well, I know that these are both budget things and I like them both, but which one do I like better and why? So let's blind taste those next to each other. And really, I credit most of the development of my palate to blind tasting. I mean, that is absolutely the exercise that I did to get to where I can actually taste flavors. Like that is what I did to develop my palate. And so blind tastings kind of become my thing online, but I had a problem. So the problem was I needed help to do all these videos. I still need help with some blind tasting videos. So for example, right now I'm doing Better Than Weller. And the point of the blind tasting is not that I don't know which one is the Weller. The point of the blind tasting is actually I can probably figure out which one's the Weller based on the taste, but I don't know what the other bottle is. I've set aside like 10 or 12, I don't know how many bottles honestly, but I've set aside a bunch of bottles that I think are similar-ish to Weller, and I'm going to do blind tastings against them. And so I still need help to grab those bottles and do those blind tastings. But when I'm doing like a normal blind tasting, when I'm trying to work out my palate, when I'm trying to learn something, I'm doing these blind tastings where I want to select a certain bottle. So I want to know what 4 bottles it is that I'm tasting, but I don't want to know which is which. And so I got to this point where I need my wife's help all the time to pour these and scramble the glasses so that I don't know which one is which. And then you run into problems where people in the comments are like, that's not actually blind, she's telling you, or you're cutting out the part where you see, whatever. So I realize I'm like, I need to come up with a way to do a blind tasting. And for me, the importance was on camera. I want to do a blind tasting on camera where people know that it's blind, but I don't need the help of anybody else. And so then I'm like, I can probably come up with a product where I can do that. And then I'm thinking about the product and thinking about what that's going to look like. And I'm like, well, that's way more useful than just on camera. That's actually like a product I could use to do blind tastings to work out my palate. Like that extends beyond just wanting to create content. That actually gets into the realm of just like almost like a game that you can play by yourself, where it's just like, let's just see what I'm tasting. I like this whiskey and I like this whiskey, and they're kind of similar. I want to know which one I like more. Let's put them together. So it kind of, as I'm developing it, I realize, okay, I actually think that this could be a product. This could be for a lot more than just being behind camera. This would just be fun to do by myself on a Thursday night when I want to unwind with a glass of whiskey. So somewhere along those lines, I realized that this could actually be a product. So when I started designing it, the point that I'm trying to get across is I was designing it for me. I was like, I just want something to blind taste with. I looked up the competition. I saw a couple of other blind tasting kits, and there are some good ones out there, but none of them did what I wanted to do, which is why it's called the Solo Blind. I wanted it to be specifically when you're completely by yourself, you can do blind tastings. There was one that kind of sort of did that, but it was a little clunky, and it didn't, like there were a fixed number of glasses you had to be able to use. There's another one that you could maybe do it by yourself, but you have to like close your eyes and scramble them and hope that you lose track of them. And anybody who's ever done that form of a blind tasting knows that in order to close your eyes and scramble them and try to lose track of them, when you're doing that, the hardest thing to do is to lose track of them, because all you can focus on is, oh, don't forget, or just forget that this one's the Eagle Rare. Forget that this one's the Eagle Rare. And then you're just focusing on the fact that that one's the Eagle Rare. So there weren't really any products that did what I wanted to do. And so I was like, well, I'm going to develop one for myself. And that made it a passion project. I genuinely was just like, I want one of these. And then when I realized, well, actually, I think this could actually be like a helpful thing for a lot of people, that's when it became like, okay, maybe I should try to develop this better. Like, not just like this clunky thing that I can use on camera, but like, maybe I should develop a solid blind tasting kit. And then that's kind of where we get to. So we get to that point, and I'm kind of designing some stuff. I throw some ideas by some of my buddies in the whiskey world, and a few things are going on, right? So I'm still working a 9-to-5 job. I am still making content part-time. So I'm like working almost 2 jobs, like 1.5 jobs. Not asking for any pity, but I'm just explaining what I'm about to explain. And so I get to this point where I'm basically working 1.5 jobs. I am trying to develop this passion project on the side, and I'm realizing it's really sitting on the back burner. So I'm like, I need a business partner. I cannot do this all on my own. And I also don't trust that all the engineering that I'm doing is the greatest in a vacuum with no help from anybody else. So I called up one of my best friends. I knew he was a phenomenal engineer. We went to engineering school together. And I'm like, hey, do you want to come on board and we'll be partners and we're going to develop this product? And I kind of showed him the product, pitched it to him, and he's not as involved in the whiskey world, but he's like, yeah, let's do it. So that's basically where we get to developing something that looks roughly like what I have here. We did go through some prototypes. I don't know if you guys can see it, so let me just hold up my Solo Blind. I don't usually hold it up on camera, but we did go through a few different prototypes. They looked different ways, but thanks to the help of collaborating with another phenomenal engineer, I was able to, or we were both able to come up with better ideas than we would have individually. And so I probably would not have come up with a product this nice by myself. I can say that with almost certainty. And so then, you get the collaboration and you're able to come up with things. So we're like, oh, well, maybe we want it to be able to do tastings of 2, but also of 3, but also of 4, but you want all that in one product. Well, we could do this, but it's super clunky, and we had this prototype that was really clunky. And then it was like, well, what if we come up with these little things called holsters? And And that's basically how we develop the product. And then it comes time and we realize business is really hard, and it's hard to figure out how you're going to do this. How are you going to fund this? Where are you going to get the money from? How much money are you going to need? How are you going to produce this product? Thankfully, this is where my business partner really took the reins and was like, I think we should do it this way. So if you don't know this, we produce these with additive manufacturing, which means this one, batch one, it's 3D printed. And he knows 3D printers way better than I do, and was able to come up with a very efficient way to 3D print these things. We produce them all completely ourselves. And so anyways, that is basically how we got to this design. And I can confidently say it wouldn't have gotten off the ground if it weren't for those breakthroughs that we had as a partnership. So anyhow, I probably harped on that a little bit longer than I needed to, but that was kind of like the journey that we went on, and it was a ton of fun. And I figured that background, I'm obviously going to get into a lot more, but that background I think is a little bit fun because I have never said it publicly, or like kind of how this process went. And I figure people might be curious. What does it look like when you have an idea and you want to turn it into a product? And I can tell you that it looks like spending very little time on the idea and a ton of time on how you want to produce and sell that idea. I mean, like, we spent more time on what type of a glass do we want to use. We really wanted to use Glencairns, which is what we use. How do we want to hold them? How do we want to locate them? And then the most of the time then, after we develop that, is what are we going to make it out of? Who's going to make it? Are we going to buy it from people? How is it going to be made? How it's going to be made, it determines how you design it. That's something called DFM that engineers do. And it's that's the majority of the time, I should say. That's what I'm trying to get across. So if like anybody out there is listening and you've got these ideas and you're like, what do I need to expect going into it? The thing you really need to nail down is how you're going to produce it and how you're going to bring it to market. So thankfully, we live in an age with some very nice 3D printers. I always thought 3D printing looked crappy, and thanks to the help of my business partner, he's like, "No, you can make stuff look really nice with 3D printing. Let me show you." And then we developed this for 3D printing. He did most of the changing for 3D printing and making it nice for 3D printing. And I was like, "Okay, this is actually a sick product, so I'm okay with that then." And so thankfully we had that technology. We had the technology of 3D printing. We had we have now the digital marketplace where we're like, we can just sell these online. We don't need a storefront. We don't need to get a hold of stores yet, although that might be a development in the future. I'm going to talk about future stuff here. So we were like, we can do all this digitally. We can do it from our houses. We can have packing parties and pack all these boxes, and that's how we're going to do it. So that is really how we developed the plan together. And then we put it together. We use Shopify for our website. Shameless plug. They are not paying me to say that, although I bet I could get a code that maybe I would make money, but it's probably too late for that because I already just said it out loud. So anyhow, we use Shopify, and that's how we developed it and launched it. So then we finally launched. And here's the thing about launching. This is a fun hindsight that was not fun at the time. So we had put a lot of money into it at this point, and more importantly, we had put a ton of time into it at this point. I think full development was I probably worked on it alone for a year and a half, and then we probably worked on it together for a year and a half, and then we finally launched. And here's the scary thing: I was like, I'm a whiskey nerd, and I specifically love blind tastings. I would buy this product 6 ways to Sunday. Does anybody else want to buy this product? And I was like, that was a real, genuine, terrifying fear of mine. Was like, what if I launch this thing and nobody wants it? Like, what if I'm the only one who likes blind tastings that much? Thankfully, that is not what happened. So we launched. We have a phenomenal response from everybody, which I can't thank you guys enough for. And that's going to be a common theme throughout this episode. And so we launched. And now what happens is we launch once a month. And if you're on the email list, we let you know a few days beforehand. And then we let you know the night of. And then we add stock. And then we sell that stock. And then we ship all those out. And then we wash, rinse, and repeat every month. So I'll get a little bit more to like what the business looks like today. But first, let's talk about how it works, which might be what brought you to this video. And you might be like clicking the 15-second skip. So stop doing that now if you want to know how the Solo Blind works. I'm going to talk about that. So the final design that we landed on looks like this. We've got this cover that is made to look like a barrel, obviously. Hopefully that's obvious. And then we've got a marker, and then we've got these things what we call holsters. And in the holsters, you've got an ID tag. That's what the marker's for. You can write down what the whiskey is. You put the whiskey into the Glencairn. You label the ID tag with what the whiskey is. Put it all into the holster. And then you load them up, and you can do 2, 3, or 4. So we made everything in even pattern. Ooh, that was a little sketchy because the weight shifting. We made everything in even pattern so that you could do 2, 3, or 4. I figure you're probably not going to do a tasting of more than 4, but I mean, you can if you want to, but that's, a lot for one sitting. So 2, 3, and 4 for me, that's like exactly what I wanted. And that's why we made it adjustable like that. Then you got this little wheel here, so you do that, you load them all up. I'm going to take the Glencairn off so that it's not uneven anymore. You put the cover on, and you spin it. And now, after it's spun, you have no idea which is which. And when you're doing a tasting of 2, there's quite literally no way to know which is which. If you're doing a tasting of like 4, okay, well maybe you knew that you loaded them A, B, C, D, and so you don't know which one's A, but if you figure out which one's A, then you know you've got B, C, D. So another thing that I like to do a lot of times if I'm doing a tasting of 4 is then I'll take them off after I've spun it and then reload them and then spin again, and now there's like absolutely no way to know which is which. Or another thing you can do is you just spin it once and then you take them off and you kind of put them in random spots. And now there's that'd be really hard for your brain to track which is which at that point. So that is how it works. And then you just do your tasting. Your Glencairn is in here. You do your tasting. We send out little notepads with them that you can do tasting with. And it's got A, B, C, and D on it. And those don't correlate to anything visible on here because that would ruin the point. But it's just for you. So it's like, okay, I'm going to tell myself the one on my left is A. And then I'm going to circle A on my tasting sheet so that if I drop my tasting sheets, I know which is which. Then you can put in your notes. You can talk about nose, palate, finish. You can talk about how much you like it, rate it 1 through 10. Put whatever you want on your notes sheets, and then you reveal them. And so then you can take this guy out of here, and you can say, oh my gosh, this one is this. I can't believe I liked that one the most. Whatever. That is the idea. Now, of course, the whole product, I came up with the initial idea because I love whiskey. But you can use it for all kinds of things. And so you can, of course, use it for tequila. A lot of people drink tequila out of Glencairns. You could use it for wine, but I know there are a lot of wine folks who don't like the idea of a Glencairn because it's a little smaller and has a little bit less exposure to air. But it is a tulip-shaped snifter glass, so you can swirl it and get some interaction with that air. And if you're using a small sample of wine, it's not hard to get them aerated. I have done wine tastings with Glencairns with the solo blind. And that's how it works. And so that's kind of the whole idea. You can do a tasting completely solo, completely by yourself. If this is the first that you're hearing of it, hopefully you're like, that sounds awesome, because this might be the first time that a lot of you guys are hearing of it. I haven't really advertised it a ton yet, which we're going to be taking the gloves off here soon and doing some advertising. And that's because they do sell out relatively quickly, and we are just continually ramping up production in order to try to meet demand. And so we haven't really spent much time marketing because right now, thankfully, very gratefully, we sell out relatively quickly, and so why spend time marketing it, But things are about to change because we are increasing production. So let's talk about where this business is today. A lot of you guys, I get all kinds of questions through the email, like, how many of these are you selling? What are you doing? Most of them are people telling me I'm doing everything wrong in life, which is just very positive, and I love reading through those. Thank you. But I get lots of questions through the email, so I figured I would talk about some of them because, once again, I haven't talked about this very much. So here's the first thing that you need to know. We are running production 24/7. We are creating these around the clock. That doesn't stop, and we are removing, if you know how 3D printing works, we have to remove them from the plates and then run again. And we're making some improvements to get rid of some of that lag time, but they're running 24/7, and that, my point being that is happening. So I'm not saying 24/7 and actually meaning, we print this one thing and then we leave it go for all day, and we could be printing 5 per day, but we're only printing 1 per day. That's not what I mean. I mean, the printers almost don't stop running. Of course, there's some lag time and some downtime. But we're running about 24/7 with lots of printers. We do monthly releases, as I mentioned, and you can get on the email list if you go to justneat.shop. You click on Purchase the Solo Blind. It's going to say that it's out of stock. There is a sign up for restock alerts. You plug in your email, and boom, you get restock alerts. Check that they go to spam. So that's one of the questions that I constantly get, and I'm going to run through a few other common questions. But hey, I signed up and I didn't get it. It's probably in your spam because we are a shop. We are an operation on Shopify, and Google will sometimes catch that and be like, this is spam. But if you want actually to have those alerts, check your spam and mark it, so put us in your contacts or whatever you have to do so that we don't go to spam. But yeah, you can sign up for it. We'll let you know the week of the restock. Hey, we're going to restock this day at this time. And then right before the restock, we'll say, hey, a couple more minutes and we're about to restock. And then we restock. Pro tip. Be ready when it goes live. If we say we're restocking at 7 p.m., be ready at 7 p.m. Another pro tip, refresh your screen at 7 p.m. When your clock turns to 7 p.m., refresh your screen. I've had a lot of people tell me, I sat through the whole release and they never came in stock. You guys aren't actually restocking. Yes, I promise you I'm not packing empty boxes. I am actually restocking, and you have to refresh your screen. If your computer isn't auto-refreshing, or I don't even know what, if you can set that setting or what, but if your computer doesn't refresh, it's never going to show that it's in stock, so you have to click refresh. That's another common one that we have. So a couple common questions, and then I'm going to talk about the future a little bit here. So common questions. Yes, we do sell a lot of solo blinds every month. People are like, are you restocking 5 of them? Are you restocking 20 of them? Are you restocking 30 of them? Because I just can't get my hands on them. No, we are restocking quite a lot. We don't discuss specific numbers because that would be unsavory. That could also be unwise in the business world. But I promise you, we're restocking a lot. And just to give you an idea of the scale, I do spend a whole day doing nothing but assembling and packing solo blinds every week. And sometimes that's not enough to keep up with how much we're producing. So yes, we are producing a lot of them, and yes, we are increasing that production. So that's another very common question. Are you just doing this as a hobby and you don't actually care that you're selling out? You don't care that I can't get my hands on one? I'd say this a little bit, I hope my tone's not too bad, but I get a lot of people who are very, very mean in the emails. So those are the people who I'm taking this tone with. If you're politely asking, hey, are you actually restocking every month? Then I will politely answer you, yeah, here's what's going on. Here's how we can try to help you so that you don't miss next month's restock. But right now I'm responding to the mean people. Yes, we are growing to meet that demand. This is more than just a hobby to both me and my business partner. And we are growing in order to improve meeting that demand. So there are plans. I can't get too specific. Once again, just kind of an unwise thing to do in business, but we are actively working on something that is going to massively increase our output right now that should be ready very, very quickly. And then we're working on something else in the background that is going to probably double that. So it'll probably double. After our massive increase right now, we're probably going to double that volume again. That one's a little bit further out. It's taking a little bit more time in development, but it's on its way. So yes, we are selling a multitude of them, a lot of them, as many as we possibly can per month, and we are growing to increase that as often as possible. We have a couple of very big increases that are on their way that will really hopefully help meet that demand, and then we can start up the marketing to create more demand, because that's how businesses work. And then the last question that I did want to answer, maybe our most common question of all: can you just set some stock online to allow me to pre-order it, or not even set stock, but just do a pre-order release so that I can pre-order it rather than trying to get it when it goes in stock, and then you can ship me it whenever you have it? No, we can't do that. So that's a very common question. I understand the sentiment there. The problem is it's just a matter of math. So if we sell out relatively quickly every month, then if we were to do a pre-order and just sell as many as people want to pre-order, the last people on that list are going to be months, if not years, away from getting one, at least at our current production rate, and we are working on ramping that up, as I already mentioned. But that's the problem with the pre-order. So you might think, oh, well, just let me pre-order it, and then I'll get it when I get it. But then those same people would probably end up very upset with us when they don't have 1 month later. So what we think is the fairest way to do it is it's almost a lottery. It's almost lottery style. It is be ready at the time that they release and try to snag one before they sell out. And then you have a shot every month. Whereas, that first batch of people, that first month's worth of people would get it. But then that second month's worth of people have to wait 2 months. Then that third month's worth of people have to wait 3 months, and so on. And that seems a little bit less fair and more difficult. Not difficult. What's the word that I'm looking for? Worse for the consumer, basically. That chance is completely gone. Now you just have to wait a super long time. So that's why we don't do it that way. But hopefully that problem's going to kind of go away as production increases, which, once again, we're working on some pretty big production increases. So, yeah, what's in the future, I guess, for the Solo Blind and for Just Neat as a company? That is the name of the company. Can't believe I made it this far into the podcast without mentioning that. Smooth move, Chris. But yeah, the company, the partnership between me and my business partner is Just Neat, and that's why the website is called justneat.shop, because the reason it's called Just Neat and not Solo Blind is because we plan to come out with other products, and we are working on some of them right now. And so that's a little bit of something for the future. I really can't get specific, because if I tell you what product I'm going to come out with, somebody could beat me to it. And of course, we do have intellectual property protection on this bad boy, patent currently pending, but it still just would be unwise to tell you what I'm planning to come out with. So we are working on things, though, so be ready in justneat.shop. Check it out, be on our email list, and you can always get the latest news through me on whiskey_noobs, all my social medias. I will always be announcing things through there, so just have an eye out. But without getting too specific, we really want to get into more product lines and more ways. Kind of my my philosophy here is like things that you can do to bring you back to the real world. So obviously blind tastings are a great way. They're almost meditative, right? They bring you back to the real world. You're focusing on the flavors, the nose, the palate, the finish. You're here. You're not scrolling on your phone. You're not lost off in a movie or a TV show. And that's kind of my goal, because I think we're getting so virtual as a society that my favorite product, the product that I want to design in any case, is one that brings you back to the real world. And so that's kind of the direction we're going to go. Of course, it's going to be hobbyist, and probably, as a sneak peek, a lot of them are going to be either whiskey or cigar based or that sort of a hobby based. And we don't have a ton of things cooking at the moment. We do have more products coming that are in that vein. So that, without being super duper specific, of course I can't do that. We do have some more things coming down the pipeline, so keep an eye out for those. And once again, if you follow me, you can continue to get that information, and I will continue to post about it whenever something new comes out. Okay, so I answered probably a lot of questions, but you might still have questions. What do you do about that? Well, first of all, justneat.shop. There's a bunch of resources on there. There's how to use the Solo Blind. There is this story that I just walked through. There is a version of that on the website. I think I've recited it enough times that it should all match exactly what's on the website, but maybe I played a game of telephone with myself. I probably should have brushed up on what was on the website before this episode. But anyhow, you can walk through all that. You can walk through the story of how this all came to be. You can walk through how it works. If you have any other questions, you can contact us through the website. Of course, if you're part of my Patreon page, you can always DM me, ask me questions. If you're part of the Discord page, you can ask questions through there. Make sure you tag me, and I can answer any more questions that you guys have. But I want to finish this. I am going to do one Q&A from a patron, so we do have a question that I'm going to answer here in a minute. But I want to finish out the Solo Blind topic with just an immense amount of gratitude. I am so grateful to how well this product has been received, how much positivity there has been. I know I talked a little bit about the people who email very angrily, but for every one of them, there's somebody else emailing us so understandingly. Someone who understands how difficult it is to launch a business and understands the perspective of a startup and is like, listen, like, I think what you're doing is awesome. Here's a little bit of feedback that I think you could do to improve it, but more like for the most part, just keep doing what you're doing. This is great. And I just am so grateful for that positivity because as I mentioned, we get some negativity too. And the positivity, having that positivity to cancel it out is just a blessing. So I'm so grateful to that. I'm so grateful that this product has been so well received and that so many of you guys want to get your hands on it. And those who are angrily emailing me, I'm still grateful just for the fact that you do want it that badly. And I promise you, I am doing everything I can to get it into your hands as soon as possible. And hopefully that's going to kind of cease to be a gripe here soon. And I think we're going to get there. So thank you guys all so much for your support and for the positive feedback, for the constructive criticism. I get some constructive criticism, which I appreciate just as much as the positive criticism. It's all great. I'm so grateful to you guys for that. So I did want to just take a moment to express that gratitude, but I'll stop gushing now because we do have a Q&A from one of the patrons. So if you're part of the Patreon page, you can submit Q&As through the Discord. There's a Q&A Discord server that's only available to patrons, and you can hop on there, or chat, maybe not server, but you know what I mean. You can hop on there, you can submit your questions, and then I just throw them into whatever episode I'm currently scripting. I don't do scripts, but I do show notes, and whatever episode I'm currently filling out the idea for, I throw it into there, and then the next time I record, I answer it, which is what we're doing right now. So we got a question. How do these whiskeys get their flavors, like spices, fruits, sweetness? Is it something that they add to the mash or something that just develops with barreling? Excellent question. And I will refer you to an episode of Whiskey Noobs where I actually do talk about this. Let me find that. Wow, that was an old episode. Probably about time to rehash this one. Episode number 38. What gives whiskey its flavor? So I do walk through a little bit about like the production process and how whiskey gets its flavor. But here's the thing that I want to get across based on this question, which the question to me, I already answered some of it in the Discord with a sneak peek, but the question to me reads as, are they adding things to whiskey to give it specific flavors? The answer is yes and no. So you're not adding flavoring. So if you're a bourbon or a Scotch or an Irish whiskey or a rye whiskey, any of those main categories that are legally controlled, you can't have additives in any of those. In most, I shouldn't say any, but those ones I just listed off, most of these major categories, you can look it up, but they will outlaw any form of flavoring. So bourbon is a great example. Cannot have any flavoring added to it. Now, when I say in a sense, yes, you are picking specific things in the natural process to give specific flavors. So a great, like the most obvious example, let's just focus on bourbon because that's an easy one. I know the most about it, but bourbon, right? So you've got corn as your main ingredient, but then you've usually got rye, and then you've usually got a little bit of malted barley. Well, in order to manipulate flavor, at one point somebody said, let's take out that rye because rye gives you herbal, it gives you spice, it gives you black pepper. Let's put in wheat because wheat gives you sweet, it gives you vanilla, it gives you those sorts of bready flavors. And so that's like a quick example of, okay, you want less spice and more sweet, take out the rye, put in wheat as your next grain after corn, and now you've added something, changed something in order to get a different flavor. But the additive in the way that I think you're getting at it, no, you are not physically adding fruits and spices into the mash in order to get fruits and spices into the flavor. Most of the flavor, well, I shouldn't say most. The flavor comes from a lot of different characteristics. So what goes into the mash? I just mentioned different grains for different flavors. Even the yeast strands, and some brands really, really harp on this. You know, this yeast gives me this flavor. This yeast gives me this flavor. The type of still that you use. So if you use a column still, which is what a lot of bourbons use, you're going to strip a little bit more of the flavor out of the distillate, which sounds bad, but also that allows for a lot of flavor to come through from the barrel. Bourbon is very barrel heavy on the flavor. The barrel imparts a lot of the flavors into bourbon. But of course, there's still differences from the mash bill and the distillate. But then if you use a pot still instead of a column still, it's going to leave a lot of those flavors in there. So a lot of your Scotches and your Irish whiskeys are going to do this. There's even some bourbons that do this, and you can taste a distinct difference in flavor because they're using a different type of a still. So the type of still is going to impart different flavors. And then, of course, the barrels, how they're aged. Not just like what type of barrel you use, right? Because lots of anything that's a bourbon is using a new charred oak container, usually a barrel, right? Most bourbons on the market are using the same size barrels with similar chars, but there are different char levels, right? So you can have all different levels of char where you're charring the barrel for a few seconds up to several minutes, whatever it is, to get a different amount of burn inside the barrel, basically. So you have a lot of similarities there, but you could have the same bourbon in the same barrel and the same char level, same recipe, same still, and then you put it in two different spots in the warehouse, you get two different flavors. This is the idea behind single barrels. Some barrels just end up tasting better depending on where it's at in the warehouse, and that comes from the temperature, the humidity, whether there's sunlight exposure, which usually there's not, but maybe there is. Different parts of the warehouse, different floors. How high up is it? Those high floors are going to get real hot in the summertime and they're going to cool off in the wintertime. Those low floors are going to get a more consistent temperature. So where it's aged at in the warehouse, where it's aged at in the world, obviously, I'm talking a lot about temperature and humidity. Well, you're going to have a super different temperature and humidity in Washington State than you are in Texas. Very different, right? So those all play a role in what types of flavors make it through. And then a lot of the flavor, especially in the bourbon world, is typically attributed to the barrel. And I'm not going to get super deep into this because obviously there's lots of different dials you can turn to get different flavors. But just as an example, there is a compound in oak called vanillin. And that compound, when it interacts with whiskey, imparts a vanilla flavor into the whiskey. You're not adding vanilla extract to get vanilla flavoring. It just kind of shows up because of interacting with the wood. So that's what I mean by in a way flavor is getting added, but it's not being added outside of just the standard distillation process. You're typically tweaking things within the process in order to get the different flavors that you want to get. That is usually the case. Now, there are some weird examples. So of course there's finishing. You take a bourbon out of a barrel after it's aged long enough and it is a bourbon now. You take it out of that barrel and you put it into a barrel that used to have red wine in it. Well, that barrel's going to soak up some of that red wine and some of those different flavors from it, and sometimes there's even a little bit of red wine still left in the bottom of these barrels. And you're going to finish it in there, and it's going to soak up some of that red wine. So it's kind of, in a way, like you're adding red wine, but it's not quite so strong. You don't get quite so much flavor from it as if you were to just mix bourbon and red wine. But that's just one example of one type of finish. You can also, outside of the bourbon world, you can mature in barrels that used to hold other things. Scotch does this all the time. They don't even put it in a new oak barrel a lot of the time. They put it in a barrel that used to have sherry in it or a barrel that used to have bourbon in it or something like that. So that is just part of the process, but it does, in a way, kind of add flavor to it. While we're talking about Scotch, the process of peating, you're burning peat underneath the barley in order to dry out the barley, but that peat has a very distinct flavor, and that flavor makes its way all the way through to the whiskey. So there's different ways that you are kind of adding flavor, but not in the sense that you're taking artificial flavoring and you're adding it into the whiskey. That is only the case on flavored whiskeys, or these would more often be classified as a specialty spirit, but it'll usually say flavored whiskey or whiskey with flavoring, and it's not necessarily like a whiskey anymore. I'm trying to very carefully dance around that, but the great example, Crown Royal Apple, Crown Royal Blackberry. The Crown Royal's big on their flavorings. Knob Creek Smoked Maple, that's got artificial flavoring added to it. I'm 99% sure, and as soon as I said it out loud, I'm like, wait a minute, did I just make that up? But I haven't had it for several years, but I'm pretty sure it's flavored. Let's take a look. Confirming right now. Yes. So it says right there, Kentucky. Wait, hold on. I can't read this. Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey with natural flavors. So they added flavoring to it. So it has to say that on the label. Fireball, not whiskey in the traditional sense at all. They have added lots of flavoring to make it cinnamony. So those sorts of things where it's got a flavor after the name, Crown Royal apple with apple flavoring in it, that they are directly adding flavorings into it. So that does happen, and it will usually, well, not usually, it has to say on the label that they've added something to it. So beware of that, and those are typically not what most whiskey lovers are discussing when they're discussing whiskey. And that's not to say that I don't have respect for them. I drink flavored whiskey sometimes. But it's just to say that when I'm talking about like flavor notes, I'm not talking about tasting apple and Crown Royal apple. I'm talking about weirdly tasting apple in this bourbon that has no apple additives to it, and somehow the flavors come together to taste like apple, and that's really interesting. So keep that in mind, just as a brief aside when you're talking about whiskey versus flavored whiskey. But yeah, in general, that's where the flavor comes from. It comes from like the whole process. There's just different ways that different flavors, and they all kind of come together, and it's not an exact science yet. So at the end of however many years of aging, you get to see what that culminates to, but it's not an exact science, so you don't really know. It's kind of like a surprise, which makes it so much fun, and that's why barrel picking is so much fun. So that was maybe even more answer than you were expecting, but hopefully a good and thorough answer. I am over on time compared to what I thought I was going to be, so I am going to stop it right here. I'm going to quit my rambling. Hopefully you learned a little bit about the solo blind and even a little bit about how whiskeys get their flavors. Thank you to the patrons who submit questions. I always appreciate that. You know I love answering your guys' questions. I'll leave you with learn to drink, drink to learn. Hi there. Since you're still here, I'm going to assume that you enjoyed the show, in which case, please just take a moment to leave a 5-star rating or review on whatever platform it is that you get your podcast from. Subscribe to the podcast because that actually really helps out. And also, if you're on YouTube, ring that notification bell. If you really like this show, though, the best way that you can support it is just checking out that Patreon page. It's at the description in the show notes or in the description on YouTube, or you can go to patreon.com/whiskeynoobs. That is the absolute best way to support the show, but also just spreading the word to other people who you think might be interested. I am so grateful for all of the forms of support that you guys give. And please, 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 most importantly, always drink responsibly. Thank you guys all so much. And in case nobody else tells you today, I got to tell you, God bless.